Look, as I said earlier, it goes without saying that the Matildas are the undisputed current champions of Australia. As I already said, it's impossible to conceive of any team, individual or entity to so hypnotise the nation. That said, we as supporters can't get carried away. Tonight against England will be very tough. Our defence will be put to the test. But I've said all that. Amidst all that, one other champion has tentatively emerged. It's another female, a Labor female, a Labor politician, Madeleine King, 50 years of age, representing the West Australian seat of Brand. Her father was born in England, but interestingly, on moving to Australia, worked at the Kwinana oil refinery. In the midst of what can only be described as intellectual impoverishment, with the demonisation of coal and gas and a so-called decarbonisation of Australia, Madeleine King has said what a sensible Liberal politician should have said long ago. She's the Minister for Resources. Indeed, it's not so far back, remember, that Scott Morrison brought a lump of coal into the Parliament to salute the contribution that coal made to the prosperity of all Australians? Well, Madeleine King on Monday, at a speech to the Bush Summit in Perth, said simply, "Many East Coast urban Australians have lost sight of where their food, prosperity and energy come from." She reassured our trading partners that Australia was a reliable supplier of iron ore, gas and metallurgical coal. Metallurgical coal is that essential ingredient in the production of steel, wind turbines, one of those widely used building materials on Earth. Madeleine King talked about too many Australians losing sight of what the bush represents and its central role in Australia's future. She said on Monday, remember this is a federal Labor minister, "In my view, every East Coast-based parliamentarian and journalist should experience Perth Airport on any given Monday or Tuesday at 5 a.m. to witness the extraordinary airlift of workers into the north that occurs week in, week out to ensure our nation's continued prosperity off the back of our remarkable geology and the efforts of the resources industry," unquote. She didn't flinch at saying what is unspeakable in the language of the Chalmers and the Bowens of this world. She bluntly said that our energy and resource exports were now close to $500 billion a year, and she said, led primarily by gas, coal, iron ore, gold and aluminium. She further stated the obvious: resources had delivered wealth for more than a century and were now underwriting a new boom through Western and Northern Australia, which had become, she said, the economic powerhouses of the nation. With a slap in the face to the Teals and the Liberal wets, who are progressively destroying the Liberal Party, she said, the scale of the resources and mining boom in WA and the northern regions was not appreciated by people in the urban belts of the East Coast who'd lost sight of where the bulk of the nation's wealth comes from. Make this woman leader of the Labor Party. She then said, presumably not having consulted with the intellectually barren Energy Minister Bowen, Australia is a long-established, reliable and efficient supplier, she said, of iron ore, gas and metallurgical coal. Right. Madeleine, with respect, we used to be. Are we now? Before I get onto that, I'll make the point that Minister King also made that resource companies are the largest employer of Aboriginal people. All of this brings us back to the politically and economically dangerous, incompetent Chris Bowen. Madeleine King says Australia's energy and resource exports will now be close to $500 billion a year, led, she said, primarily by gas, coal, iron ore, gold and aluminium. Well, enter this charlatan Bowen, who at the end of July was sent to Asia, God knows why, to, quote, strengthen ministerial and industry connections in support of Australia's role as a clean energy exporter, unquote. Now, you don't need to be too smart to know that our second and third largest export markets are Japan and Korea. But Albanese and Bowen and Chalmers are going on about new emissions laws. My understanding is that concerns have been raised by Japanese Prime Minister Kishida with Prime Minister Albanese. As Michael Bohm recently reminded us, consistent with Madeleine King's observations yesterday, LNG exports hit a record 92 billion, that's gas, and coal 124 billion last year. Bowen doesn't want either. So what kind of economic pit would we sink into without them? So while Bowen's in Asia talking renewable energy, and Madeleine King here is talking about the critical significance to our economy of coal and gas, the question which arises is simple. Do we maintain a highly rewarding export industry, attracting foreign investment and providing energy security to us our allies and our neighbours? Or as Michael Bohm wrote, quote, do we sacrifice it all in pursuit of unachievable, feel-good emissions targets on the altar of climate change? Well, can you imagine the stupidity? This is a delicate diplomatic problem. And they send Chris Bowen. And following the Bowen visit, two of our key customers are looking now for alternative fossil fuel sources. And as Michael Bowen reminded us, his meeting in India with energy ministers of the G20, this is Bowen, the world's richest nations, where he intended to champion Australia's interests in the clean energy transformation and emission reduction efforts, ended up a disaster. Bowen in India, telling India, who want all of our coal, oh, no, we're getting rid of all that. We'll give you renewable energy. So bad was the Bowen performance that could only be described as a failure. It's now being said that further G20 meetings will also fail. The critical point is this, as I've said a million times, we've got the world's largest economies, throw in China and India, accounting for 3/4 of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. And they show no interest in the theoretical nonsense about planet-saving issues like phasing out fossil fuels and tripling renewable energy. And of course, we've got Australia, 1.3% of global carbon dioxide emissions, 1.3%. But remember, carbon dioxide, which these wood ducks would never admit, is 0.04% of the atmosphere. Human beings worldwide are responsible for only 3% of that 0.04%, and little old Australia down here, 1.3% of all that. But according to dumbbells like Bowen, we're killing the planet when we're really killing our trading partners and killing the export income that Madeleine King spoke about on Monday. And she's in the same team as Bowen. Here were East Asian economies who make up the bulk of the market for Australian gas and coal exports, and Bowen shows no concern for their energy security. He arrives on their doorstep with a briefcase full of Australia's emissions laws, some retrospective. Japan relies on us for 40% of its LNG. It's an energy deficit nation. 2/3 of its coal comes from us. And when Bowen's confronted by what these unachievable emissions targets will do, all he can repeat, like the nonsense that Albanese and Linda Burney go on about The Voice, it's just a simple little feel-good thing on an A4 piece of paper. Bowen actively blowing up the Australian coal and gas industries, but telling Asia, we will be a reliable energy supplier, but the energy will be renewables. You see, not only will we have so much renewable energy for Australia, but we'll have plenty to export to Japan. Next, Bowen will be telling us there are tooth fairies at the bottom of the garden. Japan in particular needs our coal and gas. Bowen gave Japan and India no assurance that this would continue. So does Madeleine King's $500 billion in export income go out the window? Japan wants Australia to change our energy policy. Bowen is telling Japan to respect our sovereign policies. A dunce with a capital D. So Japan will turn to the Middle East. And the Japanese Prime Minister has now embarked on a whirlwind tour of the Middle East, culminating in a visit to the major LNG exporters, Qatar. As Michael Bohm writes, this issue has attracted a lot of media attention in Japan, with senior officials accusing Australia of betrayal over energy security. The Wall Street Journal quoted a senior bureaucrat, if this issue can't be resolved, it might undermine long-trusted relations. And Bowen talks about sovereign risk. The sovereign risk is of his making. Madeleine King in his own party outlined that on Monday. She said many East Coast urban Australians have lost sight of where their food, prosperity and energy come from. Australia's energy and resource exports, she said, are now close to $500 billion a year, primarily from gas, coal, iron ore, gold and aluminium. Bowen is putting all of that at risk. I've said from day one, this energy policy of Labor, mimicked by the coalition, member Morrison racing off to Glasgow, I called it a national economic suicide note. Professor Ian Plymouth last week on this program said that if we keep going the way we are, we're heading for bankruptcy. Well, Madeleine King on Monday put a figure on it, $500 billion. Bowen won't come on this program because he can't answer the questions. Where's the $500 billion going to come from in the future? And can the Teals, along with Labor and the Liberal Wets, answer the question posed by the Resource Minister, Labor's Madeleine King, a lone public voice in the Labor Party? Have you lost sight of where your food, prosperity and energy come from? The answer is an emphatic yes. Boot them all out, Bowen and co in the Labor Party and the Liberal Wets.